This is CNN Breaking News.
And let's get back to that breaking news. A major turning point, apparently, in those ongoing protests on Wall Street. The crowds, all of a sudden today, have grown much larger. They're more diverse, all protesting economic conditions in the United States. Look at some of these pictures we're getting in these aerial shots right now. I want to bring in Steve Kastenbaum of CNN Radio. He's right in the middle of that crowd right now. Steve, what are you seeing? What's going on?
Well, Wolf, you're absolutely correct in saying that this is a much more diverse crowd than what we had been seeing at Zuccotti Park over the last couple of weeks. I'm noticing not just union members, which we expected to started to show its solidarity with this movement. We're seeing people from all walks of life here, young and old, from every rung on the economic ladder. I've been talking to folks rich and poor. I've been speaking with people who are just starting out in life, families, retired people here. There are lots of folks who brought their young children with them. And the common theme that we seem to be hearing here is that the system just isn't working for the people anymore as it is.
All right, Steve, stand by. We're going to get back to you, but obviously it's a new development, a shift, let's say, of much bigger crowds in New York right now. And the anger we're seeing in the streets of New York could certainly be a factor in the presidential race. Joining us now, the Republican presidential candidate, the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, thanks very much for coming in.
Good to be with you.
Well, what do you make of this Occupy Wall Street, these demonstrations? Some have suggested that this is the left wing's version of the Tea Party movement on the right.
I think when you have over 9% unemployment, a failing presidency, the truth is, with this level of failure, Geithner should be fired as Secretary of the Treasury, Bernanke should be fired as Chairman of the Federal Reserve, the Dodd-Frank bill should be repealed this week. We ought to have decisive action. If you're somebody out there and you've been looking around and you begin to figure out how come the big boys get all these billions of dollars, the big banks get all these billions of dollars, somehow the Federal Reserve and the Treasury collude together on behalf of people who are already rich, and nobody else gets a break. I think people need to understand there's something profoundly wrong with how Washington intersects with New York, and it means everybody else. I'm here on Hilton Head talking to realtors who are feeling the effect of Dodd-Frank, feeling the effect of a housing decline, feeling the effect of all the money going to French national banks, to Libyan national banks, somehow not enough money for normal, everyday Americans. You're going to see more protests, and it's really a tribute to the absolute failure of Obama's economic policy that somebody who was elected by the left now has the left rebelling and demonstrating and arguing against his policies.
So am I corrected? And do I get a little sense of you're identifying with these protesters, these Occupy Wall Street demonstrators who are so angry at the system, if you will, right now, the banking system, the Wall Street system?
Look, I am as angry about the Dodd-Frank bill, about propping up big banks, about propping up big investment firms. I don't understand why Goldman Sachs got $13 billion of our money through the back door in 2008. I don't understand why the Federal Reserve has spent hundreds of billions of dollars of our money. I think at least $5 billion of it to the Bank of Libya. I think people have every right to be very, very angry. And if we stay at 9% unemployment or it gets worse, and the rumors are that this Friday is going to be worse, not better, I think the pressure to do something, not to wait to the next election, but to say to the Congress, why can't you repeal Dodd-Frank now? Why can't you get rid of Geithner now? Why can't you try to have a new policy now?
Listen to Herman Cain, another Republican presidential candidate. He gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal. This is what he said when he was asked about these demonstrations on Wall Street.
I don't have facts to back this up, but I happen to believe that these demonstrations are planned and orchestrated to distract from the failed policies of the Obama administration. Don't blame Wall Street. Don't blame the big banks. If you don't have a job and you're not rich, blame yourself.
All right, that's already generating, as you can imagine, a lot of commotion out there. Blame yourself if you don't have a job. Is that a fair statement from Herman Cain?
Well, I do think there are a lot of people who ought to have a better approach to this. I've proposed, for example, that we tie all unemployment compensation to a training program with businesses so that we don't give people money for doing nothing. I do think people have an obligation to try to work, but I think when you have something on the order of 15 or 16% of the country either unemployed, underemployed, or dropped out of work. This is a genuine systems crisis. When you have 43% of young African Americans, teenage African Americans with no job, this is a systems crisis. And yes, I do think people have an obligation to work hard, and I think they have an obligation to do the best they can. But I also believe that a lot of this system right now is mismanaged, that the Obama policies are killing jobs, and that the guys on the inside, the New York Federal Reserve Network and the Treasury Network, act on behalf of the very rich and act against the average American. And I think that is a legitimate complaint that all Americans can make in demanding, for example, an audit of the Federal Reserve. We deserve to know where our money has gone and who got it and who didn't get it and why.
But you have to admit that, and you referred to it yourself, the bailouts of the Wall Street banks and the investment houses back in 2008, that was during the Republican administration of President Bush. President Obama had nothing to do with that.
That's exactly, well, the Democratic Congress had a lot to do with it. President Obama voted for it, spoke in favor of it. Tim Geithner was a key part of it. Bernanke was a key part of it. They're the same team the president has today. That's why if you're a normal American and you're watching this mess, you're saying to yourself, there's no change in Washington. I don't know why the House Republicans don't repeal the Dodd-Frank bill this week, send it to the Senate, and force the Senate Democrats to confront it. This is a terrible bill.
But
it does
President
to
Bush
financial
was the one, though,
what Obamacare does.
He was the one who proposed all these bailouts back in 2008. Yes, Senator Obama and others supported it, but it was President Bush and his Treasury Secretary that put it forward.
Right, and his Treasury Secretary was from where, Wolf?
He was from Wall Street.
What was the background of his Treasury Secretary? Yeah, he was from I think from Goldman Sachs.
That's correct.
I'm just trying
to be fair. It's
so
not
if
just
you're a
the
normal
Democrats
American,
and President
I'm being
Obama, it's
bipartisan.
Republicans as well.
Look, I'm being bipartisan. I'm saying that Bernanke, who was originally appointed by a Republican, ought to be fired. Geithner, who was the chairman of the New York Fed at the time, president of the New York Fed, ought to be fired. I'm happy to be bipartisan about this. I think the average American has a right to say they are not very happy with Washington seeming to be locked down in paralysis, and with New York somehow, if you're big enough, you get taken care of. If you're big enough, you get bailed out. If you're everybody else, good luck. I think that's a real feeling. I'm reporting from South Carolina, where I talked to people just today who feel very deeply that nobody in Washington notices what's happening to them, but they sure notice what happens if you're big enough.
Well, let me get you to respond to one of your other rivals for the Republican presidential nomination, Ron Paul. He very much opposed President Obama's decision to order the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, the al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula leader there. Listen to what Ron Paul said today.
And they were asking me whether that was an impeachable offense, and it is. I mean, just ignoring the Fifth Amendment and assassinating American citizens without due process, and won't even tell us what the rules are. Oh, but he's a threat. Can you imagine being put on a list because you're a threat?
All right, are you with President Obama on this issue or with Ron Paul on this issue?
Well, I wrote a newsletter today. I write a weekly electronic newsletter entitled Obama Gets One Right. The fact is, Congressman Paul's wrong about the law. He's wrong about the Constitution. If you are an active enemy combatant, if you are actively advocating the killing of Americans, and Cliff and I did a movie called America at Risk, and we have footage in the movie of Anwar al-Awlaki calling for the killing of Americans. We know that he was advising the terrorist who killed 13 Americans and wounded 33 at Fort Hood. He wasn't in American courts. He wasn't in Chicago or New York. He was running around Yemen plotting the killing of Americans. If you do that, you are an enemy combatant. If you are an enemy combatant, you are subject to military action which causes killing you. You're not subject to going to court. This is not a criminal procedure. This is a war. We have a long precedent for this. You're called a traitor. Now, if he had shown up and he had turned himself in, then we would have owed him due process as an American citizen. We would have tried him as a traitor. I think we would have convicted him. But he has no defense if he is actively trying to encourage the killing of Americans. And the president was exactly right legally, and he was exactly right morally in killing somebody who was a threat to everybody.